Welcome back to the SDSS Podcast, where we tackle the business topics that keep executives up at night and employees checking job boards. I'm your AI host introducing Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman, who are diving headfirst into the return-to-office debate that just won't quit. This week, our dynamic duo dissects Daniel Klein's provocative piece from the street. Target follows Amazon and Starbucks in making terrible employee move. From retail giants to coffee empires, these companies are forcing workers back to the office, but are they shooting themselves in the foot? Tim and Andreas don't hold back as they explore whether pizza parties and break rooms actually drive engagement, why the best talent might be walking out the door, and what employees should be demanding in these negotiations. Spoiler alert, it's not just about the salary anymore. Get ready for real talk, sharp insights, and maybe a drinking game idea or two. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Keefe with SDSS Global and my co-conspirator, Mr. Andreas Wieman, and we are about to open up another conversation on the never-ending topic of return to office and what that means. But let me kick this over to Andreas to tee it up. How are we doing there, Mr. Andreas, today?
Yeah. So again, never ending because I'll leave my personal sentiment off of it. So the article that we're going to be talking about is from the street called Target Follows Amazon and Starbucks in Making Terrible Employee Move by Daniel Klein. So I think this one's really interesting because you're looking at a mix that Daniel has kind of analyzed and provided his perspective on, which I think is rooted in the same kind of sentiment that we've been sharing on the podcast, right? But you're looking at Target, you're looking at Amazon. You can argue they're both retailers, but they're two very, very different, uniquely go-to-market retailers and their business functions. And then you got Starbucks, which is a retail location specialty for obviously for coffee and other beverages. So I like the mix-up that he's included here. There's variation versus it kind of being really white-collar, desk job kind of focused roles. So longest intro ever. Tim, what's your initial take?
Well, I mean, I keep coming back to this whole thing about what are we, as if I put my business owner hat on and say, what am I getting for my labor costs? And I get the challenge of managing to that, right? So, as he pointed out in the article, particularly at Starbucks, the belief was that the return to office was partly driven by a desire to reduce headcount. And so a lot of people, given that, self-select out. They go, okay, I moved during the pandemic, like a lot of people did, to a lower cost environment. They're asking me to go back to work in Seattle or wherever. That's not viable without me relocating back there. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go pursue jobs elsewhere. The challenge is that the people who have the most skills and have the most options are the ones who self-select out. So the challenge, I think, for a lot of companies is how do you think about that labor spend and what are you getting for it, right? Because if you're self-selecting or letting people, your best talent, walk out the door, literally, then you're left with, you've got a smaller payroll, but you've also reduced your effectiveness and your tenure and your skill sets dramatically in the course of doing that. So again, yes, I'm reduced my maybe I've taken 25% of my salary cost out, but if I reduced my efficiency by 50 or 60%, that's a big problem. And I think about the Gallup report that we talk about all the time on employee engagement, global employee engagement, which is already almost at a tragic number. I mean, 30%, only 30% of people on average.
Oh, it's tragic.
States, yeah,
it's not almost tragic. It's tragic.
Only 30% of people are engaged in the work they do. And now you're going to make it even worse. I would bet that if you broke that down and looked at companies that have done massive layoffs, and there's a long, long list of them, you probably are at even half of that number, probably in the teens in terms of engagement in those companies.
Hold on, though. I got to kind of call you out on this, though. I think, companies that go back to office, do you know how much easier it is to get a group of employees together in the break room, right? Hopefully right after it's been cleaned, the break room, and then you give them fresh pizzas and pies to be able to celebrate. That's engagement, is it not? I'm being super facetious, obviously.
I know you're speaking in sarcasm. I think we might have to translate for the audience, but no, look, I've been there, you've been there, we've seen it that's not driving engagement. That may be driving people's waistlines, but it's not driving engagement. What drives engagement is people's passion for the work that they do, the people that they work with. And this is especially true with, and we talk about this often, is the generational divides and the way that people look at work and what they want from work. And as you look at the workforce that that is the great volume of people, in there, I'd actually, it'd be an interesting number what the average age is, but what we hear over and over again is less about what I get paid, although it's important, but it's much more about what I do and who I do it with. And that's really important and to people. And so that's what is driving engagement. Now, I have no problem with return to office programs because there are a lot of jobs that really require that. But don't tell everybody that there's this magic thing, osmosis, that happens when people are all in the office where they're going to learn from each other. I just don't see it. And maybe I'm not reading about it, but where companies are doing it in a more productive way is they're saying, okay, come to the office, but we're doing these either team events or we're doing structured activities to actually create those communication channels that then transition into more effective communication, whether those people are working together virtually or they're working physically in the same room.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen by osmosis. It doesn't happen by magic. It has to happen as part of a structured approach. And I was just the other day, I don't go to any of the big campuses in Silicon Valley that often anymore, but I was just down at a very big one in Santa Clara the other day. And I'm, just kind of walking around, big open format. People don't generally have assigned offices. People come in, they, grab a table. They have big cafeterias or cafes. There's a lot of that casual kind of stuff, but you don't see people clustered in groups. And again, I'm not holding this up as a scientific analysis, but I'm just taking, a walk around in one of the most successful companies on the planet right now. And I would say 60 to 70% of people I saw were working in solo at a table with their laptop or their tablet. And that's what you would expect to see almost. So I think the challenge is, okay, well, let me ask you the question in a different way, because otherwise I'm going to spin off here. But let's flip the conversation for a bit. Right now, we're talking about companies holding the upper hand that, I can force you back to the office or you lose your job. Okay.
Right.
And people are concerned about that. So
Yeah.
if I was on the other side of the table and I was negotiating as an employee, what should I be thinking about as I'm thinking about in this conversation with either my existing employer or potential employer?
Yeah. No, I think it's a good call out. And even real quick, going back to your comment on the campus that you visited, kind of what you're getting at is it's a very communal based social kind of setting versus the rigid, everybody has their own office and cubicle type of setting. It's more open and inviting, yet you still see isolationism being exhibited by the people that are there. So it's a complicated issue that I think companies are facing. We give everybody listening, we are pretty critical on what we see, but we see quite a bit. It is complicated out there. It's not, hey, we did this before COVID, and so that worked. We just got to do that again. The variables that are occurring in the world today are way more complex than they were pre-COVID. That's the first thing. If you don't recognize that you got a completely different issue you need to focus on. It's called self-realization and self-actualization. The second piece that you brought up about the generational makeup, that is also a big piece that has changed now post-COVID and what makes that up. So you figure there's about 110 million, and this is just in the US, by the way, about 110 million workers that are Gen Z and above in the workforce today. All right, so that's post 1997. They were born 1997 or later. All right. If you look at the millennials, there's about 70 million or so there. So that's over half of the workforce in the entirety that make up millennials or above, or older, I should say, because that'll get confusing if I say above. Millennials are younger that make up the workforce that's there. So what we need to do is to figure out how do we connect Gen X and older generations that are used to less variable circumstances for a couple of decades now to a reversion of what we're seeing with digitization and AI overall. That the first one that can figure out the patterns there on what's working, it's going to be great. So Tim, going back to your question on the what should the employee, talk about? And now I didn't plan on you to have like a 10-minute monologue there, so I gotta paraphrase, so we're not taking forever here. But if you have the employee side of the negotiating, what if I'm an employee and I go to you and I say something like, all right, how much is the salary you're offering me to go back to the office? It's X. Oh, it's the same that I get now, but now I'm gonna be away from my family for probably an hour to an hour and a half on, commuting. I don't know, maybe my auto insurance actually is going to go up because now I'm using my vehicle more on a more frequent basis. And I got to disclose that to the insurance provider. And maybe that means my insurance goes up. So now I'm actually working more for less if you're paying me the same salary. And then, you know what? But Tim, before I sign this offer letter, here's the negotiation I need with you. My productivity level is going to go from, 100% right now to work at home to 85%. So we got to make that adjustment in your calculation on what I'm going to provide to you as an outcome to what you're paying me as a salary. And then also part of the rationalization that goes into why my productivity drops is the focus time I have that I've demonstrated via the outcomes I've delivered since I've been virtual, work from home. And what am I going to think about? How can I be focused on the outcomes and the projects that I'm on to the quality that's provided in those in the time frame that that's provided in? I'm making that adjustment too. So all of those kind of go into just a mathematical equation of what the current productivity level is, right, as the constant and the variation that's going to be introduced with what you're asking me to do now. Imagine if there's an employee negotiation that goes like that. Most of the other people on the other side, the people in the company, they're just going to say, well, the salary is what the salary is. And you'll see the financial results on, that we see
Well,
from a lot of publicly traded companies that we see now. You're going to see that get even worse than they are now on the operating expense side, in my opinion.
I don't disagree. And it's fascinating because, we were working with a client just recently in the public sector, and they're doing a huge return to office project, and they had to back it off for a year. And a lot of it was exactly what you're talking about, because many of the people in this workforce were hired during the pandemic and they've never worked
Right.
except from home. And now they're being asked to come back to the office, and they're like, but okay, who's going to pay for the childcare? Who's going to pay for my commute costs? And and the employer is like, what are you talking about? That's on you, pal. And the people are like, well, no, it's not. I've never had to do that. So why are you telling me I now have to do that? And so it becomes extremely complicated. And to your point, people now are getting angry being forced back to the office if they don't see the value of it. And so, look, we know there are jobs that you have to be in front of the client, physically in front of the customer. And then in fact, one of the car rental companies that we worked with, they made the decision that everybody will work from the office because their frontline employees have to come to work. Therefore, everybody should have to commute and come to work. Actually, I can buy into that, right? That's a organizational ethos. That's like, we're all in this together. We're all going to work hard together to do this. And this is how that translates.
But I think that's
Go ahead.
important though. Like I just want to add, I think that's really important. And, I would say I think in Daniel Klein's article, which we'll post in the podcast too, so everybody can check it out. I think that's kind of his point is there's not really a direct rationale or reason that's even being considered. Well, there might be ulterior motives that they want to go covert with and not say this is why we're doing back to office. But at least from a public and marketing standpoint, there's not really a rationale that's being explained and being demonstrated back to the employees. So, like you just said, that's the rationale is there. Now, whether that outcome hits their hypothesis, that's to be told, and that's relying upon the execution, the adaption, and the execution that kind of goes into it. But most of the companies now are just what we're seeing is they're reverting back to what it used to be because it worked then, and they're not considering the variables that are in play now, the generational makeup of the workforce, the expertise of the workforce. Talking to a graduate who did all of their schooling online or most of it online and is pretty good academically, and now translating that right into an outcome that they've been in the space forever when everything was virtual in their experience. There's a perfect example that you just gave. We're not making the changes in the weightings of those variables proportionate to what reality is today. And companies they're struggling. They're putting on a game face. And trust me, I guarantee you the public relations department is probably getting a little bit more extra funding for a lot of companies than they're used to because they're spinning this like crazy and they're really just trying to hide and mask the problem rather than saying authentically, hey, this is something we've got to figure out together. How can we figure it out together? How can we communicate more across verticals and companies and industries and not have to worry about IP being stolen or an idea being stolen? How can we come together and say, hey, complex circumstance that a lot of us have never faced this many moving variables to this size and magnitude before. Let's figure it out together.
Agreed. And I think that's the point. It goes back to communication, right? And we talk about that quite a bit. I mean, Trent Savaggio, who's been on a couple of our podcasts, he talks about radical transparency. And I think, a huge part of what we talk about when we talk to our clients in this whole employee experience space is communication. And what does that mean? And it is one, do you have a method of communicating? Do you have a voice? Do your employees have a voice, and is anybody listening? Question number one. And number two, what are you saying in response to that? Because the other thing too is in the world that we live in today, there are no secrets, right? Like if you're doing something that even on the surface or you think could be viewed as nefarious, or maybe nefarious is too strong a word, but is contrary, you're saying one thing but you really mean something else. If that is in any way where you're going, it's going to come out. And guess what? When you lose the trust of your workforce, your productivity goes down. And you want to talk about quiet quitting? Imagine finding out that your multi-million-dollar payroll every month is 70 or 60 or 70% is people just doing the bare minimum. Well, that's
Yeah.
as a business owner, that would be kind of terrifying, but I don't think it's that uncommon. And if you look at the Gallup report, it is what's happening. 70% of employees out there are not engaged in the work they're doing.
Yeah.
I think that falls into a pretty big freaking problem. So
No, I 100% agreed. 100% agreed. We can talk about this subject for, I don't know, until the tape
we've
runs
been
out
talking
here.
about it for a couple of years already. So yeah, it'll be the world's longest podcast. But I think where we're ending at is, look, again, return to office is not a one size fits all. It's got to be unique to the environment. But at the end of the day, if you want people to be engaged and do the work for them, you got to start with communication. And that's my feeling about it. Like that's bullet number one. And then the rest of it will follow in terms of aligning, mutual benefits. The employees have to get benefits
Yep.
because otherwise they may take the job, but they're already looking for the next job, which is not uncommon, right? Like people are literally, they start looking for
Well,
the next job within 90 days of the first job. And
and the productivity you're going to get out of them when they say yes to it and settle. Like the big thing is settling there.
yep,
You're not that's what we mean by impacting your productivity. So if you financial analysts in these companies are modeling out, your cost for the mid-year, the second half of 25 right now, and you're not adjusting your productivity levels and your formulas, you guys are going to be sorely disappointed in the outcomes that you actually see here if you guys don't make the changes.
agreed. All right. Well, with that, we'd ask anybody who's still listening to please subscribe. We'd love, and if you have comments or questions, please post them, and we look forward to reading them. And hopefully, you'll be back for our next podcast.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. And great article by Daniel Klein. So props to him. We'll link in in this posting. I was going to say podcast and posting together and mash it. I don't think that'll be very catchy though.
No, just
But
let it go. Let it go.
Daniel Klein's street article, we'll make sure we link to that for you guys to check out. But like Tim said, we appreciate every listener and viewpoints. If you want to share some viewpoints with us, if you want to comment on how many times I was able to cut Tim off this week compared to last week, we're down to see that analysis as well.
Yeah, we're going to turn that into a drinking game. All right, guys. Thanks for it, and look forward to our next podcast. Take care.
Yep. See you, everybody.